I will now call to order the study session meeting of April 1st, 2024. Members of the public are invited to attend in-person city council meetings in council chambers on the lower level of City Hall. Public access to tonight's meeting is also available on the city's YouTube channel online and by telephone using the call-in numbers posted on the meeting agenda. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Mayor Leidy,
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Luqman Haramasa,
Here.
Councilmember Burns,
Here.
Councilmember Patamio,
Here.
Councilmember Kondo,
Here.
Councilmember Roper,
Here.
Councilmember Goff,
Here.
Councilmember Nowicki,
Here.
Councilmember Walker.
Here.
Thank you.
All right, we have 3 items on tonight's agenda. The first one, Adams County Withdrawal Management Services Update. Senior Deputy County Manager Alicia Rice will present the update to council. Yes, come on up. Hello, how are you?
That's me. Thanks, Mayor and Council. So excited to be here with you all. Just to give you an update, and maybe for the first time for some of you, Withdrawal Management Services is a regional effort that the county has convened with many of our stakeholders across the county and many of our communities, starting out, bless you, with mostly with first responders. And this service is probably more commonly known as detox services or alcohol and drug abuse assistance. And the point of the service, or the goal that we're really trying to meet with this, is moving to a handoff to community-based service. So looking to convene as many in this effort as possible. And so I'll roll through this, and feel free to flag me. I'm very flexible if you have questions along the way. All right. So I know that you all have become somewhat familiar with our new health department and the basis of which we provide service, which is our means by using the social determinants of health, or really a more holistic, full human approach to public health that has been gaining more recognition and steam over the past few years, meaning everything from not only your bodily health and mental health, but also how you show up in the community, whether you have housing, whether you have the capability to reach affordable and nutritious food, those sorts of things, more full human. So currently, many of you may know that the County Health Department has been undergoing a gap analysis in the community, primarily around mental and behavioral health services. And when we speak to behavioral health, it's often substance use disorders and things in that category, to see what we have in need and what we are providing currently, as well as our countywide resiliency plan. I know I've talked with some folks about that a bit. Y'all will hear much more about that this year. Our resiliency office is set to be kicking off in January, and we're taking those lessons learned from COVID in our community, primarily around the relationships that we were able to build and strengthen, and what we need to carry on with, and working together with school districts, our organizations, business, nonprofits. How do we begin to recognize where we are double working or overlapping our work, and then where are we leaving gaps? And that is part of this planning effort as well. And so looking to those data efforts, in addition to many other sources of data that we have across our cities and at the county related to housing, food access, health, et cetera, we are building more of a community-wide approach to all of these services. So the one that I'll talk a bit about today is the withdrawal management, but I also wanted to make a point. I know we've presented on the county's ARPA funding previously, but just as a reminder, our initial tranche, or tranche one, or the first half, was really put out into the community for acute service needs that the board felt we needed. That was things like our testing clinics and shot clinics, and then care for acute needs at that time in the community. Then their second half was really for those legacy and seeding projects, and they anticipated really focusing on housing and homelessness prevention, and then mental and behavioral health needs. That was their focus for all of that 50 million. So some of the things that have already been stood up or are coming this year are mobile mental health services. That is meeting folks on our trails, meeting folks in our rural areas, places where people have not been able to access some of these services before. We're going to them as much as we can while we work together to stand up more regional services. Then also our co-responder service expansion. I know that that's been really strengthened throughout all of our cities, and we're just now bringing up the last one with Commerce City. There is some funding going out from the health department to expand that again into those gap areas and rural areas. And then stigma reduction training. Doesn't seem like it would take a whole lot for folks to understand where we are currently after having experienced together a mass trauma. But we still have situations in which folks, because of their cultural or experiential background, are not seeking the services they need. And we're really trying to work to connect folks and reduce that stigma so they'll go ahead and do that. So you all will probably, I would suspect in the next 2 months, receive outreach from our public health department to want to share some of this data that came out of our gap analysis. We're also going to be sharing that in our dashboards so that we can really push that around the community. And then most recently, we were able to set a contract with Aurora Mental Health to support detox services initially. Some of you may remember when we were served as a community by Arapahoe House. It just took me a second. I was like, that can't be right, Arapahoe, we're Adams. But it was Arapahoe House that was serving our withdrawal management for many years, and they left us before COVID. And then our local CRC group took that on for a couple of years, and were only able to do it for that long, and then they were no longer able to support that. So our first responders came to the county really through our sheriff's office initially, and looked to see how could we stand that back up and do it as a community. Something that you all will see come out of both our resiliency planning and the public health gap analysis will be the knowledge that we can no longer depend on one agency to lift some of these things. Whenever we have had that, we've lost it. And so we're really looking at how do we work together as a group on some of these things that traverse our boundaries. And then lastly, we just wanted to mention that not only will we stand up these detox services, we're actually working with these experts as well to develop a more centralized location. Ideally in the county, we'd really like to be located along the I-25 corridor, but the services are currently in Aurora and Boulder, and then acute services in Denver. So none of those things are very close to us. And so we're working with Aurora Mental Health to set up those services on an ongoing basis, so we're not coming in with the good graces of Aurora Mental Health to continue to take those folks as they're needed, but to have specific services for folks who come out of any part of our county. And our sheriff is working with our police chiefs across the county to work on how do we then transit folks to that location and then back. Because the last thing we want is to strand them in Aurora if they're coming from North Glen or other areas. So I talked a bit about the partnership. One of the additional partners is Signal Mental Health. They have, or Behavioral Health, they have been our local provider of behavioral and mental health funding for many years, but now that we have the state's Behavioral Health Administration taking over and shifting some of that work, it will be changing, but they are assisting us prior to that handoff and prior to whatever happens with that. We do understand that funding is intended to begin rolling out of the Behavioral Health Administration by about July 1 of 2025. We don't know what that looks like yet, though. They have not put that word out just yet. But we, as a county, have pledged for the first year of services just over $3 million for the actual service, and then an additional $400,000 from Signal to help us to draft the centralized location and look for sites and use that expertise to know what we should be looking for. The county is also leading the sort of real estate effort to look for those properties. We have a real estate team in our facilities group that is going to help us with that. And so we will look to renew that contract after year one, but then only after we've captured some data on what are we seeing in terms of use, where are folks coming from within the community, what have their needs been, how are they then connecting back into the community, where are those gaps if they're not able to do that, and then to bring that data back around to everyone as well so that we all understand what's going on in various parts of our community. So this, I don't expect you to be able to really see this is small print, but it gives you a sense that Aurora Mental Health does feel that from the licensing to cutting the ribbon and serving folks on the centralized location could take about 18 months. We're hoping to streamline that a bit, but even if that is the case, you know, within the next 2 years, we'll see something that doesn't currently exist. So it's exciting to see some light at the end of the tunnel. And again, here's another handy graph that you all can hopefully see a little bit better on your screens. But this is a 3-year estimate of both detox or withdrawal management and then a walk-in crisis center both, year to year, to serve the entirety of the county, all cities included, whomever might want to be included. So then this second page gives you a sense, I pulled it out so you could really see it, just under 5 million would be what we would anticipate when both services are up and running. That is not what we're asking everyone to share in because we recognize that there will be all sorts of varieties of funding. But we also have had outreach from community groups who want to partner with us and provide more one-stop shopping, so to speak, in that one location. So even the handoff for folks would be close by. So then, sort of what everyone is hoping for, that we will be magically bringing you a sense of where funding will come from. It will be blended and braided, just like all of the rest of our human services are, and one being Behavioral Health Administration, then grants working with our health department and others, and then the local government contract participation. What we hope to understand at the end of year one, and it won't be a calendar year this time, but rather it'll be closer with what we see with the state's fiscal year where they run July 1 to June 30. Our contract is anticipated to kick off here in April, but to be able to extend through June 30 of 2025. So we'll begin to understand what are our participation numbers so we can get a sense initially. We know that that's not what it's going to look like going forward because without our centralized location, even with transit, we're probably not going to see folks self-referring to that location. We'll still see law enforcement take them there. That will still occur. And we'll still see folks come out of hospital environments and go over there. But the self-referral and the walk-in with family members or friends, that's less likely at this stage until we get a more centralized location. And I believe, so this is another fun one with small print, but I wanted to put this up here so that you all understood where we're working in terms of that larger collective impact. Not only are we working on detox, but many of our ARPA dollars also funded the very recent youth homelessness center that just opened up, as well as some other services for folks, including the Family Justice Center that is currently underway, and some additional domestic violence, particularly high-risk services out of our DA's office. We have funded the initial funding either year 1 or up to year 3 for all of those services. And those are the ones I mentioned before that we're really looking to approach from that regional perspective where we all work together to see what we need to be doing. And so preparing for the future, we'll continue to work with law enforcement around what some of these needs are. But really, as we start to get some of this data in the next 6 to 12 months, this will be when we're showing up at AdCog and sharing some of that, bringing what we've learned so far, and then having those conversations with you all so that we can have a better sense of where we're going into the future. Did all that make sense, and can I answer any questions for you?
Absolutely.
All right.
Councilmember Kondo?
Great.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Can we go back to
Yep.
page 6?
6.
So I just wanted to make sure I can square
What does
this.
6 look like?
It's got the, I think it's the timeline.
The timeline?
The-
Yep. Long-term strategy.
So on the far right, it says month, and then after that, you have Q1 through Q6. I'm assuming these are quarters.
These are quarters,
So-
and I pulled this out of Aurora Mental Health's proposal, and that is the first time I noticed that detail. Thank you for that. But those are quarters.
So what I'm supposed to take away from this is that this would be operational in about 1.5 years.
For the long-term location. For the current contract, we anticipate being underway by the end of April,
Okay,
this month.
which is delightful.
Yes.
I'm relieved that there's something that can happen.
We approached it
Soon.
short and long, yes.
Okay, that is one thing. And then the second, clearly, yes, ARPA, you're supposed to spend by the end of this year. So I'm inferring from what you're talking about is that going forward, we're going to have to figure out how cities are going to contribute to the pot.
Right.
And I wonder if you have any particular thought how you would do that? Would it be based off of call pattern, or population?
Yes.
Any preliminary thoughts about how this is all going to be allocated and shared? Because
Right.
from my perspective, where I sit here, I'm thinking, okay, need to figure out how much money we need to budget in 2025.
Right. Well, and 2025 potentially, but probably closer to 26. So the way that these remaining ARPA dollars are set up is we must tell the Department of the Treasury that we are fully allocated by the end of this year. Then we must be fully contracted by the end of 25, and we must be fully expended and reported by the end of 26.
Okay.
So I want to say that we'll have really great data in time for Budget 25. I just don't know that that's going to be the case. We do anticipate that we would take a similar approach to the way we all undertook Ralston House, which was case amounts plus population. It was a weighted average, and we all pitched in. That's going to be really difficult to judge, though, until we get to that centralized location and we can really see where folks are coming from. So we'll share the data, and then we'll need to talk really as a group about what we feel is fair after that. It could be population-based. It could be shorter or longer than that, depending on what cases are. But I think really we will need to deduct what the state is going to be pitching in, what we can raise out there, and then what we can all work together on.
Okay, understand. Thank you very much.
So that was the only hand I had. Did anyone else have any questions or comment? And I think it was pretty straightforward.
Well, great. And if y'all think of things on your way home, I'm easy to find at the county.
Okay.
Thank you so much for
you.
having me. I appreciate it.
All right, our next item, Event Center Feasibility Study Phase A update. The senior planner, Sarah Dusenberry, is here to introduce this item.
Good evening, everyone. Just wanted to give a quick bit of background since it's been a minute since we've talked about it and we have a couple new people on council. The feasibility study was a council-directed study to kind of understand the viability of an event space at the Stonehawker Historic Site. With the primary impetus for the event space was to kind of determine if the use could provide a sustainable funding source for the Historic Preservation Foundation for the purpose of implementing preservation programs and initiatives within the city. So that's kind of a quick rundown, kind of the purpose for it. Tonight, we have Ryan Johnson with Johnson Consulting, the team that put it together, to talk about the Phase A for the study. Thanks.
Hello there. Good evening. Ryan Johnson with Johnson Consulting. Really appreciate the opportunity to be here and speak with you all. Just by way of background, I lead our public assembly facility and event facilities practice areas, so really focus on exactly this type of land use. Before I get started, I also did want to thank Sarah and the planning department, and also the economic development folks, and the North Glen Historic Preservation Foundation as well. So, just to kind of orient everybody to the evening agenda here, really 5 different sections we're going to go through, starting with an introduction, brief overview of a market assessment that we conducted, then trends, engagement, and case studies, and then concluding with recommendations and economic impacts, and then any next steps or questions that you all might have for this process. Just by way of background and to qualify our firm's been in business for over 25 years. Worked not only here in Colorado, but all across the country. Really significant experience in the Denver metropolitan area on a whole range of facility types, ranging in size from something as small as 150 people all the way to the master plan for the Colorado Convention Center. Here's a little graphic that we created to really kind of think through the process that we go through. So if you look on the left-hand side, there's a variety of stakeholders and participants that all have ideas about the potential project. And our first, effort is really a listening exercise to understand what people are thinking about the project and what they view the opportunities as. And each group has their own orientation and ideas. And as we go through a process, really developing consensus and then a strategy that leads to either a go or no-go for the project, and then also developing an implementation strategy if it is a go. Again, as Sarah mentioned, this study was really focused on the Stonehawker Historic Site. Really beautiful natural setting located within a residential area, so kind of a unique location for an event center, and also really trying to develop a strategy for revenue for the North Glen Historic Preservation Foundation. Some of the key questions that we were looking at are here on the left-hand side of the page, and really trying to understand if there's a market for this, what existing assets are in the community and the surrounding area, and then how a new facility at the Stonehawker site would operate and potentially serve as a resource base. So we looked at the hotel, convention, performing arts markets, regional and national trends, existing meeting and event facilities, case studies, collaborated with an architect to help understand the site layout potentially, then obviously toured the market area and the site, and conducted a lot of stakeholder engagement. And out of all that research and outreach, so some of the key takeaways and highlights, the scale of development, ongoing costs, marketing and operations would really be a challenge for the NHPF. They're really all volunteer-based, and something like this really needs to be led by a professional manager or management company, in our experience. So that was one. And then facilities, that are owned and operated by North Glen are performing well. And this facility could serve as a relief valve and also diversify some of the, at the community center here, the community rooms get utilized quite a bit. And there's also some challenges with how they operate with the theater. So this could be another location for some of those community-type events, social events. And then also the design should be flexible and multi-purpose to be able to serve a broad variety of potential users. And again, as I mentioned, really need to have a highly qualified general manager to oversee the operations here. And thinking about all those, opportunities or challenges, the city also has competing development opportunities and initiatives, and really trying to understand the hierarchy of where this fits into that hierarchy. So now as we go through our market assessment, just to refresh everyone's memory of where the Stonehawker site is, you can see it's the gray little area on the bottom right hand of the site map. There's an existing historic house, and really, again, in a natural park-like setting. So pretty appealing from an event center perspective, from a location and site attribute perspective. Just a little bit about the economic and demographic composition in North Glen. A smaller but growing community with a track record of providing quality facilities to serve your residents. I think here your new community center, the new city hall that you all are developing really speak volumes about, where you're taking this community and the level of care that and quality that residents get in their access to, education, arts, a variety of things. There's also improving income levels of disposable income, and also a solid mix of white and blue collar employment, and also a very low unemployment rate. This next slide really highlights the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And I think two of the strengths I'd like to point out are the high propensity to spend on recreation and entertainment within the catchment areas, and then also proven success with your other community assets. A couple weaknesses to highlight. Current community perception is that the site is not open to the public or accessible. And also the site location being in a suburban neighborhood. So if you have larger events come through, traffic impacts, noise, things like that could really influence and affect the local neighborhood. But on the opportunity side, this location really could be appealing to families leaving the larger metro area. The site location being in a natural setting, and then also encouraging higher utilization of an existing community asset. And I think from a threats perspective, the two to focus on, from my perspective, are really the clarity needed on the site vision and control, as well as the failure to recruit a skilled venue operator. Really, that's really what the business model is depending on, is that operator. And these next couple of pages here really provide an inventory of all of the performing arts as well as other event facilities in the market. This slide in particular is focusing on the performing arts inventory and really focusing on those venues with 400 or fewer seats or capacity. And really all of these are highly utilized, but most require operating support and subsidy. And then on the event center space, which is more akin to what we're kind of visualizing for the project, really have a lot of venues. Again, this is a 60-minute drive time with 10,000 square feet or fewer. And really focusing, I think, on the wedding and social venues. Those wedding and social venues listed here are really in high demand, and they book multiple years out. So there's waiting lists and an opportunity from that perspective for a new facility. And then also, again, those community rooms at the North Glen Rec Center, also very highly utilized. But again, the limitations given the proximity to the theater, there's a little bit of an issue with sound and then also parking if they're having some concurrent events. And then here on the left, you can see the performing arts facility inventory. All those facilities on the preceding slide are plotted, as well as the event center. And you can see North Glen being a younger community, it's still really adding to its inventory of facilities compared to more well-developed locations in the market. And then also, this project's small, but, there could be some instance where there's going to be hotel room nights that are needed to support activities. And really, as it's hard to see here, really only one hotel in North Glen proper. So all the surrounding communities would really be needed to support the operations of this for any overnight accommodation. A couple things, just focusing on the broader industry for events. A lot of times, what you're looking at here on the left-hand side is the event attributes that happen on a national level. So millions of events, millions of attendees, and what we like to really focus on is linking the event opportunities back to the economic clusters of the local host community. And it just so happens one of the largest event sectors is also your largest economic sector, which is the medical and healthcare industry sector. And then on the right-hand side is really some national spending information. Local spend is a little bit lower than people coming to visit from outside of the market for arts and entertainment. And then also, again, hotel room nights, that 14.3% of all visitors to some type of performance actually require a hotel. And then again, 2 out of 3 non-local attendees' primary reason for a visit is actually an arts and entertainment activity. So it really brings a lot of people into a market. And this really is looking at the future of design, what are important attributes? And that really also relates back to venue selection. So meeting planners and event planners are going to look for these location and access, flexibility, high-quality food and beverage, and technology are some of the most important components of these facilities when you're planning and designing for them. All right, so just to summarize a little bit about our stakeholder engagement, this is really a critical component, if not the most critical component of our work, and really spent months developing and executing on our engagement strategy. And that included key stakeholders, potential partners, other industry experts, local organizations, as well as promoters and event planners and other local venues operating in the marketplace. All right, so some of the takeaways from those conversations, this really could be a primary venue for hosting smaller events, would require its own team of staff. The city, has a Parks and Rec department, they have a special events department, but they're really highly deployed on their own current projects and operations and really don't have the capacity to take something like this on. And then also, when we're looking at the risk for competition, as I mentioned earlier, a lot of these wedding and social event venues are booked well in advance with waiting lists. So we think there's a real opportunity to provide additional capacity to support and capture some of that demand. All right, and then also a really important thing for us to look at are case studies. And we looked at a couple, one that was in Wisconsin. It's more of an ecology center to really kind of think about the natural environment and how to maybe tie in and leverage some of that opportunity. And then we looked at the Armory Performing Arts Center in Brighton, and then the Lone Tree in Lone Tree, and then the Parker Event Center. And we were not looking at these two, the Lone Tree and the Parker, for their performing arts components, but they both have special event spaces attached to their performing arts theater space. And so that was kind of the focus for our analysis of them. And the bottom three are really what our kind of vision and focuses are these barns, the D Barn in Longmont, as well as the barn at Raccoon Creek in Littleton, and then the barn at Evergreen Memorial Park. And really, those kind of set the vision for how a project like this could be operated and kind of the design aesthetics and also what is popular among those wedding and social activities. All right. So to summarize, and again, it's hard to read this, but looking at a total of about 5,600 square feet with a capacity to host about 150 people at any given time for an event. And there's some really, I think, interesting things about the site opportunity. You have the existing farmhouse, you have a relatively new barn storage facility, and then, you know, the site could go where it's indicated. And then you could have a really interesting outdoor courtyard type environment, which would be, I think, very popular and attractive for event attendees. And then also allocated about 30 places for parking. And, you know, that's probably on the low side, but again, you know, trying to figure out shuttle strategies or joint, you know, shared parking arrangements or, you know, Ubers, Lyfts, those types of things to try to minimize the amount of traffic coming into the site. So the cost for this is actually quite expensive when you're thinking about a 5,000, 6,000 square foot space. These types of facilities have a lot of high-end development requirements from audio-visual to acoustics, to back of house like kitchen. So, you know, as you all have gone through the process here at the City Hall, I think you've seen some you know, per square foot cost numbers that have been very high. And we're projecting about an $840 per square foot cost. So that, with a square footage requirement, would be about a $4.8 million development cost. And then an additional, just under $1 million to develop the parking. And then you layer in the soft costs, which we assume at 25% of the subtotal from above is about another $1.4 million. So when you're talking about total cost, it's really a $7.2 million project in today's dollars. And then we escalated it at a rate of 6.5% to reflect a start date of 2025. So all that said, about a $7.6 million project. So very expensive. And I think, you know, there's a lot of, you know, value and a lot that the community could benefit from, but again, it is very expensive. And that'll come into play when we talk about the revenues and expenses in a little bit. Moving on to the demand strategy. So let's see. All right, so on the left-hand side, my slide deck's a little different than this one. So the projected events really ranging, you know, a variety of different categories of event types, so meeting, conference, corporate events, breakfast, lunch type events, banquets, arts education, civic events, and then hosted, themed, and performance events. And really, if you look on the right-hand side, each of those types of event categories have a different spending attribute. And the social banquet events have the highest, and followed by the meetings and conferences. So as we go to this next slide, really thinking about the demand strategy for this. So you have a fully public operation, which really is used most, you know, pretty much by the public at a lower rental rate cost structure, some private event activity. Then you have all private with some public utilization, and then a public-private, which is shared, about 50-50 in this case, and then a public nonprofit orientation. So those are just some examples of how this could be operated. And each one of them has a different prioritization and purpose. So this one, I think, to maximize the revenues, just given how expensive, it would really have to have a high level of revenue generation and really focusing on those social banquet events and try to make as much money as possible. As we get to, and your print was small, this is really small, so. But just to kind of recap, and what we're gonna do, just for simplicity's focusing on year 5. Usually in event facilities, years 1, 2, and 3 are typically what we call a ramp-up period. And then by year 4 and year 5, they really start to stabilize. And in year 4, there's a slight operating deficit, not counting in the capital cost for debt service. And then year 5, it has a small operating profit. And then as you think about the debt service getting factored in, which we've calculated to be about $346,000 on an annual basis, you really don't have any money to really support the original objective of the study, which was a revenue stream for the historic foundation. So, with that being said, this would be an expensive proposition to pay for the capital costs, and it'd be a break-even operation from the day-to-day operations. And then on this next page, really goes into the detail of all the calculations that we developed for the revenues as well as the expenses. And a couple things I'd like to highlight here. For the other revenues for the facility rental, we're assuming a day rate type of operation. So that'd be about a $1,500 day rate. And when you look at the community rooms, which are booked on an hourly basis, and you do an hourly basis for this, dividing it by 8, it's actually about the same rental rate as was currently being paid at the community rooms over here. And then also the table on the bottom right here really gets to the staffing requirements that we see for the project. You would need to hire a dedicated manager and someone that's really well qualified and is an industry expert. So someone that has relationships with event planners, hotels, and all the assets and people that you would need to make this project successful. And they'll also have to be creative. There's gonna be a lot of content and an event creation and curation that this individual will be responsible for. And you'll also need one dedicated event staff person, and probably about not a full time person, but a half person for maintenance and ground staff. So those three, we're assuming about $185,000 payroll cost. Then when you layer in benefits, it really comes to about $250,000 for salaries and benefits on an annual basis. So one of the things that we like to do, as you think about having to support the capital costs and hire new people, is really look at the economic and fiscal impact of a project. And we really focus on that as being the return on investment calculation. So there's a lot of spending that happens. And as you see, different categories of people have different attributes. Some stay overnight, some are day trip, some are exhibitors, and they all have different spending attributes. So we take those folks and their attributes, and that equals the direct spending caused by the project. And then we have indirect and induced spending as well as employment that happens. So they're not just jobs created directly on site, but people need to buy things and staff up to support their own operations to support the food service industry, for example. Then you have also the fiscal impacts, so the sales tax, the hotel motel tax, and other spending attributes. Let me get to this other page here. So, again, I think focusing on year 5, that second column, and really looking at about 21,000 visitors brought to the site. Those on-site and off-site spenders are going to generate about $2.8 million in year 5. And then with the indirect and induced spending, that's going to be about $5 million on an annual basis. And then those jobs, you have the 2.5 people on site, but there's also about another 38 people that'll get jobs that'll be created that are going to be needed to support the operations of the site. They won't be on site, but that'll be throughout the community to support it. And then as you're looking at the fiscal impacts, the state of Colorado, Adams County, and also the city of North Glen, they'll all benefit from both the sales tax as well as the lodging tax. And when you look at the calculation for North Glen for the sales tax, it's about $114,000 on an annual basis. And then for the lodging tax, for the one hotel property would be about an additional $14,000 in hotel motel tax. So I think, this, really the takeaways here are there won't be sufficient funds to support the NHPF. And it'll really take a lot of effort for limited financial return. And really, I think at this point, this is the first of two other phases that were contemplated. And our recommendation would be not to proceed past this phase, just given the cost of it and the amount of effort that the project would take. So with that being said, that's really the kind of the end of our prepared comments. And if you have questions or anything I can clarify, please, let me know.
Thank you. We do have a few questions. I'm going to jump in first, though, because first of all, I want to thank you for your work. This is a ton of work. However, I think my questions are more for staff, because I'm not
Sure.
quite sure how we got here. Your key takeaway is you can't afford it, it's too big, obviously. This isn't what we asked for, so that's my concern. I'm looking back at the memo, and it says, on July 10th, we approved the contract so that you could do the feasibility study. Question number 2, what are the appropriate attributes for the site and facility? And in every conversation I had with council when we had this idea, and also with the NHPF, it was much smaller in scale, much more rustic, definitely not 5,000 to 6,000 square feet with a full staff, and that was never the intent. So when I listen to this presentation, I'm thinking, I completely agree. This is too much. It's too much for the site. It's too expensive, too much on the staff. I just don't know how we got there. And when I looked at the report and I was like, wow, the ideas are being compared to really amazing facilities, including all the barn ones that have probably the aesthetic we're looking for. But I've been to those, and they're high-end event centers. The entire time, we were focused on maintaining the integrity of the history of the site and of the space and the size. And so this just feels so big when we didn't ask for that. So my question is really more for staff. How did we get here? And where do we go next?
Yeah, so I think kind of how we got here, we kind of left it within the proposal as an event center, kind of broadly, kind of understanding what that means, knowing that it would be a smaller scale. So it is still only about 150 people, which is a relatively small number for a venue, for weddings, et cetera. So that was kind of the focus, was this idea of wedding types events. Then what else goes along with that, what would be needed? And I think in some of the engagement with the other groups, so we spoke with the Parks Advisory Board, as well as the Northland Arts and Humanities Foundation, our event staff, some of the economic development staff, other ideas for kind of how the space could be utilized and added to kind of meet the programming needs that would get us to the point of a revenue kind of stream. So there is a level, and please correct me if I'm wrong on this, there's a level that it was kind of getting to a certain scale that could potentially provide. There's a level of programming that definitely needs to happen, and this venue would kind of support that. So I think that's where it kind of grew, was kind of in that engagement kind of process, as well as understanding a certain level of facility would be needed to even potentially get revenue. And it's looking at this kind of level would be that, but then understanding that ultimately it probably wouldn't make as much sense because of the historic impact, et cetera. So I don't know if that makes complete
Yeah,
sense. It kind of grew in the process.
I was going to say, it sounds like it snowballed quite a bit, because the original conversations were about almost a structure on site. that could support much less. I mean, at least in the original conversations I remember having, it didn't even have like a kitchen. I mean, it was very, very rustic in nature, almost like a shelter for, if you envision the powwow, right? The powwow is a beautiful event. It's hot. They need, storage. They need additional places. Something, I don't know, this just wasn't ever the plan. And so as it has grown, I'm sitting here going, well, of course, that's a no. And so I feel like that's a lot of work
Yeah.
for you to tell us, of course, you can't put an event center that size in the middle of a neighborhood with no parking and we wouldn't even want to do that. I wouldn't want to put something, it would take away the whole integrity of the space. So that doesn't even seem to make sense. I don't know, I'm very confused. What do you got?
So a couple things. I think part of our motivation was to create a net positive revenue source that was fiscally sustainable for the foundation. And so when we were looking at an event opportunity, right now, there's an existing pole barn out there that pretty much describes exactly what you're saying. That was not part of a viable option because of the size and scale that it would not perpetually generate enough revenue. So this is an iterative process. One of the things that we also talked with the foundation about is that this is coming from an overarching idea that they had over 12, 13 years ago, in which this space is not dissimilar to the space that they had originally contemplated. So that was also part of our foundation for looking at this, is that we were going back to what they had originally identified 12, 13 years ago when they first made this concept approach to the city to investigate it back then. And I even think that Joyce had mentioned that back then it was like $1 million to build that facility, which if you prorate it in today's dollars is right where we're at with this
Right.
particular analysis. In terms, you had also asked another question for next steps. One of the other things that we talked with the foundation is that their underlying motivation is to try to find a financial fiscal source to maintain programming and projects and education through historic preservation. And I think really the conclusion for all of this is that we were trying to figure out what sort of business model generates anything and how long is it going to take to do that. And what it shows is that there really isn't any, this is as small as you could probably go, and it still really doesn't pencil. If you go smaller, it's not going to be any more viable from that standpoint. So when we looked at, could the foundation manage this instead of having a staff person? The issue is that we would be programming this facility over 200 to 250 days a year. That's 4 days a week for us to get to a revenue proposition of net positive in a 10-year timeframe. So it's like, these are all the variables that we're trying to do to say, hey, how do we create a fiscally sustainable source for them? So when we got through this process, the answer was, this isn't really penciling. And one of the things that Sarah has worked with them through the COVID time is a strategic plan. And what we were talking about as potential next steps is taking the remainder of this budget amount to do a facilitation with the foundation to figure out what are the other opportunities that are out there for them to perhaps have a better fiscal source that doesn't require such a large capital outlay. So that was one of the things that we would be recommending to council to consider, is for us to sort of do a deeper dive on other opportunities for future programming that may not necessarily involve the utilization of an event space or anything with Stonehawker. It could be fundraising events. It could be, I know that we do Dances Through the Decades. That's one thing where they get revenue from it. But if we scale that to a different level, then the initial goal here was to find funding for them to do programming and whatnot. There may be a better way to answer that equation than trying to rent out event space. And I think the other thing that we had a long conversation on the 26th with the foundation was the concern about the impact to the building and to the property, and really trying to figure out what could we really do differently that might be a better outcome for what the original intended purpose was.
Okay. And I think where I got lost in that is the goal to generate revenue. Because when the idea first came about, that wasn't the goal. So it wasn't let's create a space to make money. It was, let's create a space to build community, to give them more opportunities to bring people in the space safely, and to have perhaps additional sheltering or maybe small events, but we're talking like a 20-person wedding, not 150 people. Like, I think they've had weddings at that site, right? You can have very, very small venues, I think. And there were multiple conversations, and I can tell that it's definitely snowballed, but every conversation I was a part of, so I don't know if all the different parks boards and whatever took it bigger, but it was very small. It was very, really just in line with the integrity of the space. So putting some huge barn over there that's gonna require a ton of parking is never the idea. Like really small shelter-ish, maybe you could throw, 50 chairs in there for a small one-person guitar concert. Like really, really intimate and changing the whole, I don't know, I feel like it just really got lost. And I was like, no, it would just be insane for anybody up here to go, yeah, $6 million, build it tomorrow. Nobody's gonna do that. We're not that dumb. But I think I still wanna open the door to a conversation about what could be there. And I thought that's what this study was gonna do. That it wasn't gonna take a big picture idea and run with that completely. That it was gonna say, here's the space, here's what you might be able to do with it, and this is what it could cost. Hi. Would you like to join us?
Do you mind?
No, please.
Good evening.
Tell me what you know.
And again, thank you for having us, and we appreciate everything. It was a lot of work. You've done a lot of great things. In defense of, some of the things that are going on, we did provide some of the drawings to city staff that Jack White, one of our members, had drawn. It was more of a conceptual type thing. But the foundation agrees with you and with everybody. We've seen the presentation. It definitely has snowballed. And we definitely had no idea that when we first walked into this, that it would take on this kind of face. So we have had a special meeting, and we're going to have a couple more special meetings just to talk about the site. Because the foundation 100% agrees that they want to do something, but they want to sit back, take a strategic look at what has been presented, as well as where we want to go with the site. So a plan that we have that's going to be coming up pretty soon is to bring that plan back to you at a study session so that we can kind of figure out what's the next steps. Definitely, it's always been, we'd always want to make money. I mean, the foundation, that's what they're there for, but it's a bit on the grandiose side. Does that
Okay.
help a little bit?
That helps a lot, actually.
Yeah.
And I just look forward to the conversation continuing on a more reasonable scale,
Yeah.
if that makes, yeah. I have a couple more hands. I know I just
Yeah.
jumped in there.
And Jody was part of our meeting, and she can kind of speak for what,
Oh, good.
we were talking about. But the foundation was really concerned in the very beginning how things were moving along, but we thought, they can get scaled back to a certain degree, but we need to take another hard look at it.
Councilmember Goff?
Thank you, Mayor. So I guess, what I was really hoping to hear tonight was something about the feasibility of parking and other infrastructure, and then, kind of maybe reverse engineer what we could do with those limitations, because if you're talking about the powwow, well, it'd be great to have, shade and picnic tables and, a bathroom, whatever house. But the parking is a huge issue. I mean, when last time they had it there, people were parking all over the hillside and the dirt and stuff. So I just feel like that is almost the first thing that has to get figured out. The amount of traffic and the parking and, what kind of, electricity and plumbing and whatever we would have to do there, so. But I agree with you. Yeah, this would be, wonderful if we had unlimited, well, I don't even know if it would be wonderful if we had unlimited money, because I don't know that the neighbors would be really happy with something like this, so.
If I could just add a little bit, two things. You know, one, I think to the, how we got to the scale of operation, when we were starting our research and talking about the potential program that would be viable, that people would use, you know, they do have minimum requirements to be able to host things. And, you know, you can do family reunions, you know, social get-togethers that are a little bit more, you know, cost conscious and could be in a more, you know, scaled back type of operation. So we'd be happy to help, you know, look at some of that. But, you know, from an actual financial viability standpoint, you know, that you're really gonna work even harder in our judgment to try to sell and operate a space like that. And, you know, and then, you know, just the food and beverage component to it, I think is really important to focus on. You know, that's probably the biggest revenue generating, you know, item for a facility like this. And so you might not need a full kitchen, but, you know, catering. So there are absolutely ways to, you know, scale back, you know, the program and the recommendations, but, you know, there will be financial consequences to that. And then the parking component was really kind of another, that was the next phase of our work. So, you know, we didn't really get the opportunity to address that in this phase here.
Yeah, I guess I almost tend to think of this area as more like a park than a revenue-generating facility. Although we called it an event center, so that does make you think of that. Thank you.
Councilmember Byrne?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Yeah, I mean, going through the dates of this, of when this was first presented, and when I joined council, and sort of like what I remember about this conversation, is that it was always an event center, always about having weddings, hosting outside events, outside of the community. And so, like, to me, this plan makes logical sense to that, because, like, if it is about servicing events and programming that isn't just city-based, then yeah, you need to have factor in all of these considerations. So, like, I guess, like, I'm confused, because I was also the liaison for, I'm not gonna know the acronym right now. I'm so sorry, Sarah. Thank you. And it was always about this sort of like a place to bring people from outside of North Glen to North. That was my understanding. It wasn't just like, because from what I'm hearing, it was originally about amplifying like the powwow and making that bigger, like this one specific event. So it just, I feel like it is different, but from my point of view, this is what I was expecting from this like market analysis. Like this makes a lot of sense to me from my timeline of events and what I've experienced and perceived. So that's my.
So confused by that, because honestly, I mean, this is the neighborhood I live in. I would never ask for that.
No.
I would never advocate for that.
Yeah.
It just doesn't fit on the site. And so it's just not authentic to the space. And so that's why I'm so confused. I'm like, I don't know. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm talking about like a barn with no front door.
I mean, I got married in my
Or some
backyard.
folding chairs in. I mean, that's.
Yeah, and I would not get married at a place like this, you know?
I don't know. It's interesting. Councilmember Kondo.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. First of all, thank you for this great, voluminous work. As I was reviewing all this, I have about 6 or 7 different questions, but I'm not going to go through all of them. I am relieved that the mayor did say that, you know, from an economic standpoint, this just does not pencil at all. Although, now that I'm listening to Councilmember Burns, I kind of have a similar sort of recollection of the history. We talked about this as an event center. And usually when I hear those two words together, it kind of conjures up a certain sort of concept or idea, like the Armory Event Center and that sort of thing. So I was thinking, okay, yeah, this is kind of the scope of what we were asking you to work on. And, you know, clearly in this manifestation, it will not work. And so I would like to ask a few questions, though, in the interest of trying to understand. So on page 126, you talk about your demand strategy. And I think about it from a marketing standpoint, and I love your SWOT analysis. But on page 126, you talk about potential demand layers, and I just wanted to know, from that perspective, did you do this analysis looking at profit margin? So in other words, the social banquet events are the ones that generate the highest profit margin.
That's correct.
Okay,
And you can see, that's actually why we have the dollar symbols. So on this slide here on the right, the social banquet events do generate the most food and beverage, also have the highest rental rate potential. And there's a lot of, AV, opportunity.
right. So that's not revenue, it's profit margin, so it's what you get after you collect your ticket sales and pay out the vendors and the staff and all this other stuff.
Yep.
Okay, well, then that makes sense to me, because, when you look at the table on the left-hand side, I see why you're biased so high on banquets, for example, line 3, where you're talking about the 70s.
And the other, component to that too is, the wedding, market in this area, this region is really, it's pretty robust. It's very robust. And I think, this type of facility, again, I really do hearken back to having the right manager and operator. But, I feel very confident in it being able to host a wedding, Friday and Saturday, most of the year. So that's how we get to that type of level of demand for the banquets, for example. So,
Madam Mayor, were you thinking that this would become a wedding venue? Was that kind of part of your original intent?
Mentioned weddings
or
in the sense of like
concept?
a 12-person wedding, like a front porch of Stonehawk wedding. Like it was never 100 to 100. It was never this. So, and I don't know. I'm just lost in how we got here. I mean, I know that we're here, but I think what we're here is with something we can't afford and does not fit on this property. So
I'm
I
very
like-
much in agreement there.
I like the next steps that were proposed.
I will yield the floor. Thank you.
Councilmember Roper?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Yes, this was only my second meeting with the Historic Preservation and the Foundation. So again, when I came into this, was kind of already rolling, but really, I think the proposed for the presentation was a historic community gathering space, but then they really wanted to also make it fiscally responsible for the city. And we even talked about at the last meeting, I said, I think some of us on council have different ideas about what an event space would look like as far as, is it the First Bank Center? Is it a pavilion? And so we did discuss this, and I am thankful for the overview and the great presentation. I think where it really leads us is that this isn't feasible for us. One thing that I would really like to see us delve into in our next steps is how can we start to use it for education for students? It's an amazing treasure that we have in our community. Why don't we partner with, our 5-star schools and get them in there? The students need to be learning about the community that we have. So that would be one way that we could really start using it for positive. And I guess
Councilmember Condo?
Yeah, I'd like to react to what Councilmember Roper said, making it an educational opportunity. I thought at one point or another, we were throwing around a community garden sort of thing as well.
There is currently one on site, so it could be building off of it, but there is currently a kind of small community garden on
Okay,
site.
gotcha, thank you.
Okay, so yes, I was actually going to react to Councilmember Roper as well, in the sense that you paraphrased so nicely. It's like, that was lovely. I mean, I think the word pavilion was a little more lined up than, a historic gathering space. I think another phrase that's more in line with, I think, where we're headed. But again, that does not discount your work, so thank you for being here. As I mentioned, my questions weren't really for you, they were for everyone else, because this is definitely, a high-quality assessment, so thank you for your work.
thank you, appreciate it.
And I think we've heard that hopefully we have some foundation next steps that we can lean on, and I'd like to partner with them a little more to find out where we're headed.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, up next, City Council Quarterly Agenda Planning. City Manager Heather Geyer will introduce this item.
Thank you, Joanna. Good evening, Madam Mayor, members of council. We are going to walk through the quarterly agenda planning process this evening. I'm not going to read these bullets to you. Many of you have become familiar with what this process is, which is really to check in on where we're at with how the tentative future agendas are being scheduled, and for all of you to ask me questions, any clarifications, and so forth. And so we're going to review the agendas this evening through July 1st. The next session that we'll have following July 1st is on October 7th. So in terms of upcoming meetings, we do have a couple of things that I'll draw your attention to. On May 27th, we will be celebrating Memorial Day, so we will not have a council meeting that evening. That means that we do have to have a special meeting in the month of May because we're required by the charter to have 2 regular meetings. And so our city clerk updated the tentative future agenda today. We selected May 6th as that evening for the special meeting. So if you look at the tentative future agendas included in the packet, you'll see that May 6th is now a special meeting. And then we'll have the regular meeting on May 13th. And then May 20th will be a study session. Meeting additions include the strategic planning follow-up session that is scheduled for Saturday, May 18th. Now, in terms of items to highlight, I do have several pieces to highlight beyond what you see on the slide in front of you. To kick us off, council's going to take a field trip on April 13th. That's a Saturday, so not technically a meeting, but a fun opportunity to travel down to the studio for Jody Bliss, who is a sculptor, for our new City Hall sculpture. Those of you who can attend, you need to meet at City Hall at 8:30 a.m. and you'll return to City Hall no later than 1:30 p.m. Amanda and Michael have confirmed that you'll spend about an hour and a half with Jody in her studio. Her studio is down in Monument. So if you have not confirmed that you want to attend this field trip, please reach out to Michael Stricker within the next week so that he can account for your attendance and participation on that Saturday. I will not be attending with council. I will be out of town that Saturday. That was a pre-arranged trip that I could not change. The second item, which is the Civic Campus Parking Study, I did remove that from April 15th, and it will be rescheduled. Not yet. It's not yet rescheduled. It will be rescheduled in the next week or so. I have scheduled Brian Mason, our district attorney, for May 6th. He's going to provide an update on the progress that he and his office is making on creation of a family justice center that I believe a couple council members have recently made reference to in terms of their attendance at that Family Justice Center Summit that we hosted at our Parsons Theater. On June 17th, we will have a presentation by the Rocky Mountain Partnership, also known as Strive Together. They're part of the Strive Together network, which is where that Strive Together piece comes into play, by Lysandra Gonzalez, their CEO. A few things that that would have been on this slide, but it was post packet. On May 6th, I've added the Islamic Center request for a pedestrian crossing on Irma to the May 6th agenda. That request came forward through Councilmember Walker to take a look at that crossing, and so staff met on-site with representatives from the Islamic Center, and engineering has been working on a pedestrian crossing solution for that location. And so council will be provided a presentation on what that solution is, the funding required for that solution, and how we can implement that solution this year. On May 20th, a couple changes that I've made include adding the traffic calming policy, bringing that back to council per council direction not too long ago. And then we've added the senior bus item to that agenda as well. So I've tried to provide you with some real-time updates, given that the tentative future agendas continually get updated. There are still a few things on that TBD list on the back of the tentative future agendas, and I've asked directors to continue to work through and get items scheduled as we can, given that we're starting to enter the summer, late spring, summer months in terms of scheduling. And so we want to make sure we get things done as quickly as we can. Happy to answer any questions on anything that's on the tentative future agendas.
Councilmember Kondo?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So I didn't want to throw anything into a wrench into the machine. But this morning, Rocky Flats Stewardship Council had their board meeting. There's a movement afoot to reform the Stewardship Council because it seems like it's kind of become a little bit, should I say it, headbutting, controversial. And these developments literally are within the last week. We hired an outside consultant, conflict dispute resolution, to come in and work with the 10 communities to get a gauge of, what we think we ought to do with the Stewardship Council. Either we shut the council down entirely, or we reform it, the purpose and the structure, or we just continue status quo. Part of the reason that drives this is that the executive director, David Abelson, he's really getting burnt out and tired, and he's thinking that he wants to leave. And so we're trying to resolve this literally by June 1st, which is a very tight timeline. And so my question for the days is, clearly, I think we want to be able to provide or have some resident input. It is so short-term. I don't know if you're comfortable with me working with staff to kind of capture that long time horizon that Shelley Stanley, for example, has, and Laura Fazim, so then I can kind of reflect that in my response on the questionnaire. Each city is going to get a questionnaire, single questionnaire that the city representative would complete. But I'm looking for some guidance here as far as what you all, how you all would like me to proceed, because I want to make sure that I do justice and I appropriately reflect the sentiment of the city when I complete this survey or questionnaire.
So as a calendar question, because we're talking about the tentative future agendas, what is that you want? Are you asking for a study session? Are you asking for just
I
an email
think
question?
what I would request, I actually have the draft survey, so I can send it all out to you so you can see, or questionnaire, draft questionnaire.
Okay,
Survey was controversial, we're calling it questionnaire now.
okay.
Would it be appropriate, Madam Mayor, if I forward it to the entire group and maybe we spend the next study session just making sure we fully understand and are, that I could collect that sentiment or feeling from the days so that I'm pulling the questionnaire out appropriately?
Can I ask a question?
Yes,
When do you need feedback on the survey?
I think they want to collect feedback on the survey by around mid-May at the latest.
So go ahead, Mayor, sorry.
Clarifying question. Is that responses or is that,
Response.
okay. I didn't know if you were
Yeah.
gaining feedback on what
There's
the
actually two
survey should
pieces.
be.
Right now, they just released the draft questionnaire, literally this morning.
Okay,
So, two parts. Phase one is input as to the questions on the questionnaire.
okay.
And then second by mid-May, the city's response to the questions on the questionnaire.
I don't believe we should be responding to the creation of the questionnaire. I think that's your body that
I-
needs to figure that out.
I think that I can handle that myself, working with staff, of course. But the second piece, which is to receive your thoughts and input on the response due mid-May, is something that I'd like to make sure that, we get on the calendar.
Well, given that I've moved some things around, we do have opening, we have one item right now on April 15th that I was going to work to shift some things around. It sounds like this is a timely topic. I'm admittedly behind on email because I've been very focused on the mental health transitional living facility. So I think I need to spend some time tomorrow getting up to speed on an email that you sent, probably with a lot of this detail. So I could talk to staff in program and space on April 15th if that works on the timeline and if there's the consensus of the council to put this on the agenda.
Yes, I mean, that makes sense.
Okay.
How does everyone else?
Thank you.
Great, thanks. I had it is a scheduling question. I just was wondering how many of us are going to CML.
Oh,
Isn't it during the week or for a few days?
Yeah, it's
The
like
18th through the 21st.
Monday.
Yeah, so that's,
Wednesday,
yeah, it's a Tuesday through a Friday,
Friday.
yeah,
In November?
yeah,
July.
Tuesday through
I
Friday.
mean, June.
June.
That's,
June, CML. Did I say the wrong thing?
Yeah,
Yes.
is it CML or NL? Which one are we talking about?
CML.
State.
When is that one?
It's in
June
this
18th
window,
to
that's why I asked. June 18th to 21st.
It's in Loveland.
Okay.
Oh, yes,
Tuesday,
okay, then,
Wednesday,
for some
Thursday.
reason I thought that was November.
Coming up.
NLC.
Okay,
NLC.
thank
That's
you, thank you,
NLC.
thank you, thank you.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay,
yeah.
okay. I was just wondering. As far as events go,
Okay, so you all are going up Tuesday, not Monday, right?
yeah, that's what I was
Okay.
looking at, so- because we have a
Yeah.
Monday meeting.
Because we want to make sure we have a quorum for Monday night, to your point, Mayor.
Okay. Yeah, so we're coming on the, all right. Any other questions for, yeah,
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So I noticed that the traffic calming policy is on May 20th, but it also is in the to be determined. I'm assuming maybe that's a typo?
We'll take it off of TBD.
Okay.
Yeah, that
and-
was, yeah.
Great.
Thank
And
you.
then My question is that when we'll have a chance to talk about Melody again,
Correct.
considering all the recent developments and, person's house getting plowed into?
Yes, so there's a couple pieces that I can expand on, Mayor Pro Tem. So the council direction was to bring back the traffic calming policy, get creative. And so Jason and I are tasking leadership team with, we'll have a session here in the next couple weeks where they'll weigh in on what more we could do traffic calming wise. We need to retest Melody Drive. And then staff is also looking at the blind curve and the hill issue, given the time you and I spent with the resident out in the field after her landscaping wall was hit by that vehicle that slid into it.
Thank you.
Yeah.
just because I feel like we always get caught chasing our tails a little bit with council appointee evaluation. Is that,
Yeah, if
Like
you jump to July.
Oh, I see it,
Yeah,
July
no, I have it scheduled in there.
I just saw it, sorry.
No, that's
good.
okay.
Okay. That's great. Like we'll be on time.
It always sneaks up on us.
Any other questions, comments, scheduling thing? No? Okay.
Good? Okay, thank you, Mayor and Council.
All right, are there any other items for council tonight? All right, hearing none, we are adjourned. On the meeting, I don't have to bang.
Okay.
Bye-bye.